All right, guys. Hey, how's it going? It's Kai with Kai Dragon Gardening and Cooking with Anne, who we kind of had a Back to the Future moment here. I guess she's
Missing an arm again.
vanishing. So yeah, I mean somebody's going back in the past and messing with mom apparently. Don't know why. Yeah, well, as we get through these, we'll try to improve it. I'm not used to having two people, so I may have to see if I can set up a second camera for her, but studio's kind of crowded, so it's kind of hard to do that, but it's all work in process as we get going. But today we're probably gonna start doing these just because mom and I talked about wanting to do some more mother-son stuff to talk about gardening, and it helps with watch hours, things like that. And you kind of see us from a non-film perspective, whereas you always see the videos, the editing and stuff. So you get to kind of see us in that retrospect. What was that all about? Hadn't seen that before. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about April gardening, because today's April 1st, and this is some stuff that you should be aware of, because especially if you're in the Midwest, even the South, and depending on how far north you want to go, there's still something for you in this live stream. One thing we're going to talk about is weather changes. So I have probably 500, 600 plants that I need to harden off. There's a couple things, though, that are factors in the hardening off. Right now we're dealing with 50 mile per hour winds, 60 mile per hour winds. Don't put your plants out there during those windstorms. Don't. It don't matter how much you've put a fan next to them. That type of wind in those small containers will shred them. The second thing you want to look at is the weather conditions. So we thought we were over this whole cold spell. This Saturday, it's supposed to snow and ice again. So be prepared for that, but there's ways to be prepared for this. Frost cloth is still your best friend during this time, where you may have one of those 1 or 2 off days if you've already got plants in the ground and established. For us, it's just a matter of timing to get everything out now. But this is also a time we're also going to start sowing more seeds in the ground instead of doing indoors. We are experimenting with some other containers, and what I found interesting is using like the bonsai containers and putting 6 or 7 tomato seeds in has yielded higher bushy type plants versus the 6-7 pack small containers, which I found has been really interesting from a science perspective. But there's also a couple of factors. The soil is much thinner in those containers because you only have this much soil, whereas you have 6 plants competing with this much soil in a larger container. So yes, you may have some roots that may end up tangling up in themselves, but I found that it's not so bad when you get ready to plant them or move them, and that'll help out quite a bit. I want to do more testing, but we're talking about building a grow lab in the basement to run some tests during next winter and early spring, because I would like to share more of those results with you guys when we're talking about it. So factors consider: wind, cold in April. Those are 2 things that you're still going to have to worry about if you're transplanting. If you're going to plant, this is a time I would say plant directly in the ground for these particular plants we're about to discuss, because you don't want to waste too much time anymore at this point, because once you transplant a plant, it slows the growth down temporarily while your plant's adjusting to its new home. So I don't recommend transplanting it more than once unless you have no choice, because it will slow no matter what. Now, one of the things that is really good during April, and I know Mom's got a massive list here. Tomatoes are still really good. Peppers are really good. Those are ones that you're going to want in the ground now. If you are trying to start them indoors, it's a little late. You could work on them in the greenhouse, but even then, I think it's all too late. At this point, you're either going to have to buy them or you're going to have to sow them directly in the soil outside. There really isn't much time left on those because they take so long to get established. They take so long to get ready. Now, there is some others that are really good, which is cucumbers, zucchini, squash. Those three families I would sow in the ground unless you've started them a week or two ago and they're already sprouting. Like we have a whole bunch sprouting as we did last week's show. And they grow very fast. I wouldn't worry about those too much. Uh-oh, she vanished again. Mom's a ninja. She's a ninja, guys. What can I say?
Always wanted to be one.
Yeah, apparently. So right now, those three are really good, but I will warn you, do not plant squash, zucchini, or cucumbers together. They're all different families and they will cross-pollinate. And hi, Kimmy, how are you doing? So when I say by that is you'll get some really weird looking zucchini or squash, and watermelon and cantaloupe are part of the same family as well. Those cross-pollinate. Mom had a fun story, I believe last week, about how she had watermelon that cross-pollinated with squash because their garden was too crowded in the area they were doing at her friends. So she had some weird squash type watermelon that was just curved and all weird. All those should be separate. You can have them in the garden, but just I would easily have them spaced out at least a minimum of 8 feet away from each other. And the reason I say that is you never know what the pollinators will do. They go from one flower to the next, and next thing you know, you may have a contamination. And there's not really much you can do to prevent that unless you're basically putting them in a tent or some type of security where no pollinators get into it, no bugs get into it, and you're out there cross-pollinate yourself. Which, getting up at 7 in the morning to do that isn't fun. I did that before when I covered up all the zucchini when we had vine borers. Getting up at 7 in the morning to go out there with Q-tip and try to cross-pollinate all the flowers was not fun. It was very arduous. I would not recommend it unless you got that time. Now, some people may enjoy that. I was like, I'm not doing this again.
But I'm going to stop Kai there for a minute while he's on the subject of squash. And I'm going to give you a list of just a few varieties that are early starting squash that you may want to go ahead and try. This one is going to be a huge squash, and I really encourage trying to grow your squash vertically. You can get the string and hang it from a board. There's the tomato clip lines now that they have, and you can clip it as it grows. But some of these you may want to try because they're a more early growing squash for early season. So get the right varieties. Make sure that when you're doing gardening, it doesn't really matter. The tips that you get from us and stuff, you want to know your zone, know what climate you are in, and know when your last frost date's going to be, because that's going to be really important. If you get something that's starting to grow and it's starting to do really well, but you can't cover it up with frost cloth or plastic or something, and you know that there's a freeze coming and you're trying to grow it vertically, that plant's going to die off on you. So there are different things they have on the market now. There's, where they have got the plastic that you can cut so many feet as you need it and tie it off. You can do the same thing with trash bags. Anything that you can do to cover your little seedlings when they're still growing. But the Gilbert English custard is a small, kind of like a patty pan type squash. The white seagull squash. You want your butternut squash is really good, and it is a good early squash. The trombacino squash, it's gonna look like a trombone, basically. It's skinny and then fat at the other end. It looks like a malfunctioning melon, but it's really good. Chiffon is an early compact squash. It's light yellow. Emerald Delight is also compact and open. And you want to remember that they do like a lot of compost, and put about 2 seeds in each spot with the point going down. And like I said, try to grow these vertically. You're going to have better luck with it. What was one of the other, you mentioned your cucumbers?
Yeah, you have your straight line, you have your pickled ones. There's all sorts of cucumbers that, I mean, we've used the straight line, we've used the pickled.
So
there's so many different kinds.
If you don't want to have to worry about the male and female flowers and pollination and this type of thing on your cucumbers, the parthenocarpic, which I usually probably say that wrong, you can grow them in small spaces, and they'll pollinate themselves. So quick snack, if you can get that brand, because they always sell out really quick. They're highly compact. Hocus is like a vining plant. Tender green is burpless. If you buy the burpless brand of cucumbers, they're less bitter, and they are also less attractive to the cucumber beetle. And on cucumbers, you want to probably put 2 or 3 into each one of your grow bags or ground, or if you're doing 5-gallon buckets or whatever you were doing to do that. Cucumbers do not really do well when you are trying to transplant them. So that's why I don't recommend sowing them indoors and then taking them out and transplanting.
Now, we did do some of that this year on last week as an experiment, because what I want to do is test and see how much faster these grow directly sowed in the ground once we get that established.
Yeah, because you're talking about squash.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about cucumbers. Cucumbers.
Well, they're the same. Cucumbers in general, I wouldn't do indoors. Now I think about it, because I don't believe we did any cucumbers last week.
No, and if you like pumpkins and want to do something early, get you some honey baby squash and maybe try that, because some of that stuff, it's still a little bit early, because you want to remember your ground is still cold. So you want to concentrate on your cold weather crops. So the stuff that likes the cooler weather is going to do a lot better for you.
Broccoli, you still have time on your broccoli, your lettuces, your spinaches, bok choy, which is really good. Green beans is peas, they're tolerant to a lower temperature. Kale is another one. Artichokes, those are more tolerant to your colder. We're talking 40s. Nothing's really tolerant when you get to 30, except for like kale and a few lettuces. But at that point, if you're going to go in the 30s, I recommend frost cloth. I can't reiterate that enough because you don't want to lose your seedlings. Or the other option is if you have old aluminum cans and it's only going to be one night, you can take this tiny aluminum cans with the openings cut on both ends, place right over the plant, and then you can put a little bit of straw or something over that to protect it overnight. Or let alone you might be able just to put the coffee can over them or aluminum cans and just leave it alone. The point is you're protecting it from the cold air, the cold breeze, that type of stuff. And remember, heat always rises, so that cold's going to come down, and that's where your plants will start freezing. But we've had in the past, when we've had one day off where we've had freezes, we've been able to cover the even asparagus up with just aluminum cans, and they made it. So that's one thing to consider. And you can also do aluminum cans and then put the frost cloth on top of that if you're worried about crushing the plant, which is another great way to minimize your losses.
Another thing that works really well if you have terracotta plants, or not plants, pots laying around, or other pots, you can double up on empty pots and turn them upside down and put them over a seedling, and it'll help protect your seedling. 5-gallon buckets, just anything that's going to provide some warmth for that plant when you're starting out.
Especially in these earlier parts right now, it's crucial because you want to get everything in the ground. But of course, Mother Nature never cooperates, especially in April and March. And that's where you just got to be ready to improvise and figure out the best means. And this is stuff that you can get reasonably cheap. We're not really, as we were talking last week, we're just your average everyday gardeners, just normal homesteaders. So that's something that's really important. You have all these guys that usually have all these different tools and stuff, but that's where you're talking more major money. But for us, we're looking at the ways that everyday Joes can protect their garden.
Yeah, keep it simple. You don't have to spend an arm and a leg to grow food for your family. And more people are doing balcony gardening and small space gardening, and they're doing a lot of container gardening and hanging pots off of fences and walls and different things like that. There's different types of pots that are available now that there wasn't before. I've even taken like a old pair of shutters before and made a V with them, and then hung pots off of that and had different flowers growing in that, and even had some of the bird houses on top and stuff, because I also like to help bring the pollinators and the birds in, because believe it or not, they actually still help the garden. So it's something to consider. You don't want them eating your seeds and taking off and making things worse, but they do actually still help the garden. So
another ones that I like to plant in April would be like your watermelons, your cantaloupes, but I would do those in mid-April. That way, you have a lot more warmth at this point. I wouldn't do it the first couple weeks of April. I know a lot of packages say so in May, but you're wanting to get the most out of your plant. And that's why I recommend, and that's what we're doing this year, is we're going to be doing our watermelon and our cantaloupe in mid-April instead of sowing in May for our zone. That's really important that you kind of plan things out on how you want to do things. For example, we're transplanting in a video coming up sage. We're pulling up the 5-year-old sage, we don't want any cold days when we're doing this because we don't want to damage the roots. So plan accordingly to the weather as well. That I can't stress that enough. While you're doing these April crops, the sowing and prepping, just be really cautious. Now, if you're further south, like we're talking, parts of Oklahoma, your Texas, things like that, you might be able to get away with a little bit more because, you're not getting as cold. Just be very cautious because you never know when you're going to get those oddball days that suddenly a cold snap will wipe everything out.
And like I said before, knowing what zone you're in is going to help you a lot with that. And then keeping an eye on the weather. Like I said, if you, watch to see what's going on for the week, because it changes and you kind of need to know, when you're going to have to water, when you might not. And, most of the country is going through a drought. So it's a good idea if you know that there might be a chance for rain. A lot of people have invested in rain barrels and other ways of collecting water to use in their garden. Everybody's trying to be more frugal and more cost effective with the things they do in their garden. But sowing and growing and still being able to maintain something where they can feed their family and do the things that they love. That's what the most important is. And there are
another thing you can do too, and this was a science experiment. I wish I had documented it 2.5 years ago. I kept green beans, cabbage, and spinach alive from October all the way to January, where I could not do it anymore because the temperature went down to -30. There was no way I could do it, but without a really better source of heat. But if you got a cold night and you've got one of those cheap greenhouses that you buy for like $40 with the multi shelves, you can also use gallon jugs and put your near as hot as you can tolerate water in it, in both of them. Put it at the bottom on the shelf, let that heat rise. That way it helps keep the greenhouse warm during those cold nights that are going, if you have one that drops in the 30s, just to help keep it going. Then you could turn around and use the water. You could reheat it up, however you want to do it. I mean, that was a project I did using just a 5-gallon bucket. I took a garden bed, put plastic over it, and then I had just one 5-gallon bucket full of hot water, and it kept it warm throughout most of the night until it got to the point that was just not enough heat. So there is ways to keep things going, and I wanted to bring that up because that's another cheap, affordable way to keep like your $40 greenhouses and stuff warm.
Another thing is the clear tarps that you can get. I believe tarps.com was one of the websites I think that I went to, and they were running specials on a lot of the clear tarps, and they make really great covers for your garden beds when the weather's getting a little colder, even for some of your stacking planters and things, because a lot of people that have small spaces will grow into stacking planters. In fact, I just ordered a new set and I was very well pleased with them. They came in multicolors. They were a smaller set. I'm going to be doing a video later on planting different spices and stuff to make a tea garden. But they had the watering trays that set up a little bit higher, and I really did like the design on them. But they were a set of 5 and they were on wheels, so you could move them around, and they end up, when they're all stacked together, it'll be about 4 foot tall, and I got 2 of them, so we could do one for different herbs and another one for things that we were going to use for teas and home remedy type things. So it's something to do. If your root crops, they can tolerate the cold. So get your beets in the ground And this is where your companion planning comes in. Plan ahead what you and your family love to eat, but your leeks, your carrots, your beets, onions,
garlic,
all of that kind of stuff. They're root crops. Now is a good time to get those in the ground. They don't have a long time. They're quick maturing crops. Daikon radishes, those are great. Our family loves the daikon radishes, and there's all kinds of different radishes available, from the pinks, the reds, the whites. So, and as he was saying before, with the different types of lettuces, arugula is a very good cold tolerant lettuce. It's got kind of a peppery, nutty taste, but it makes just a little different salad blend, but it really does go good with the different lettuces and the kale, mixing all that stuff together. You can make some really good creative salads and then just add like a little bit of chicken taco meat, or, just a little bit of fruit slices like your tangerines or your cran raisins or anything like that, and really make something that's kind of a neat snack for the family, or just as a meal. Lemongrass, marigolds, nasturtiums, those are flowers that you can go ahead and start sowing in the ground this time of year. A lot of people will go ahead and start those inside in the greenhouse and let them get so big before they plant them outside. But you can go ahead and put some of that stuff around in the corners. Basil is another herb that you can
chives, oregano. I mean, pretty much your oreganos, your mints, you could do that as well. Your lavenders, rosemary, thyme, sage, that's all a good time to plant these. So you can really get a nice herb garden, but beware of certain ones that are perennials and they will get massive. When I made a mistake 5 years ago by putting 2 sage plants in my raised bed, I started them as seeds, and as we're going to show in this upcoming video, just how deep the root system goes 5 years, and they do deplete the soil very quickly of nutrients. That's why we were researching, even with fertilizer, pretty much that bed was gone. You could not, if you put tomatoes in there, we were trying to figure out exactly why we weren't getting the yields compared to the others, even with the same amount of fertilizer and stuff. And then it, we were doing a little bit more thinking about this, and it's like, the sage plants, just as how old as they are, how big they are, they were eating it. They were eating that faster than any other plant could.
It just competed for the nutrients. So it's another thing that you want to just watch what you do with that kind of stuff. Mint is great to use in the garden to detour pests and stuff, but I highly recommend putting those in small pots and then maybe setting the pots around near the other plants that you want to protect. But occasionally lift that pot up, make sure that the roots are not coming out the bottom and going into the soil, because mints do have a tendency of getting very vigorous, and they can take over a bed if you are not careful.
Same with oregano. Oregano is another one that if you are not careful, you'll have it all over the place. That's why sometimes you'll see houses that have a lot of mint in their yard. Well, somebody at one point either had mint seeds, or they had pots, or they had a raised bed or something, and that they just spread. And they're a very difficult weed to get rid of if you let them run wild.
Now your potatoes, That is another thing that it's April. It's time to go ahead and start those. There's so many different ways you can grow potatoes. We'll be showing some different ways. We're going to grow some this year in laundry baskets, which will be kind of different.
Trash cans, trash bags. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it. You just have to make sure it gets adequate water, has adequate soil, adequate sun, but not too much sun. You don't want to burn up, and keep the soil, at the right levels, and you'll be good.
Make sure when you're starting out to, your soil needs to be rich, well-draining soil. And when we mix ours up, we always make ours from scratch. There's different types of compost that you can get. Most people recommend the cow manure over the chicken and the horse, but it doesn't really matter that much. It's just that the chicken has a little more nitrogen than some of the rest, so you kind of have to test your soil if it gets to be too rich, so you're not burning up your plants. But we always make sure that we're using some vermiculite to help retain moisture, the sphagnum peat moss, a good topsoil, and you can get the topsoil that has your compost blend in it. But you want a good ratio when you're mixing that stuff up, and mix it all up very well before you're adding that to your garden bed. And then make sure that you're working that soil up that's already been there previously. And if you need to add food, because you do want to feed your soil, I always recommend the blood meal and bone meal for your seedlings starting out. So make sure it's a good time to put some of that in your garden bed and work that into the soil real well.
And always have a mascot with you as well as gardening. This little guy here likes to be in every video.
Yeah, we got 3 little mascots.
Yeah, this guy, he was jealous that he wasn't in the show tonight, so we had to add him to the show.
So cilantro is another great herb that you can plant early. If it gets too hot, it starts to bolt, and so they do have different types out there.
No, it's not over with if it bolts. That's one thing I'll say. If you get the cilantro that's coriander, that's the spice coriander. So the seeds themselves are the spice. So and when we talk about bolt, for those that aren't aware of that or just learning, bolting is when the plant says, oh, my cycle, my life is over. I need to propagate more seeds. And so it stops focusing on plant production and focuses on seed production. And a lot of those will bolt if it gets too hot. So that's one thing you got to be aware of in April. I wanted to bring that up. Your broccolis is one that is very, very intolerant to the heat. It will bolt once it gets past about 75 degrees from my experience with it. Bok choy is another one that will bolt very quickly. So keep that in mind, that you may have to add shade cloth if you have a hot spell coming very quickly. And if you have a lot of direct sunlight on them, that's something that I warn everybody. Cilantro is the same way. If you want to make your cilantro last a little longer, you do not want the soil and the sun to raise its temperature too much.
And they have kind of a hard shell on those seeds, but if you crack the hull a little bit, it'll speed up the seed starting. And the soil temperature, it's best at 55 to 65 degrees for your cilantro. Succession planting is always a good idea. So especially if you're wanting to make sure that you have plenty of it for the season. If you intend on making a lot of salsa later on down the road and stuff, you may want to do a lot of succession planning with some of your other crops.
And there's nothing wrong with you letting some of your cilantro go to seed if you want to replicate getting cilantro really quick. There's some people that will try to propagate seeds, get the seeds that way. Let's say broccoli is a cool crop you could plant in September or October. So they may let it bolt, which does take up real estate, and then they'll take the seeds from there at the end of this cycle, pull the plant after it's done, but you're also using up valuable real estate. So in my opinion, it's still probably cheaper just buying a package of seeds, because that soil has a lot more use at the moment than it does waiting, say, another month or two for seeds to fully prepare themselves. You know, the pods have to dry out, all that. It takes a while.
Dill is another plant that you can plant in April as a companion plant with some of your other vegetables. As a matter of fact, it's another one that detours a lot of pests, and a lot of people will let dill go to seed. There's different uses that they do for dill, and that's another one that you can plan on doing some succession planning so you have some later on, especially if you have a lot of cucumbers that you're wanting to pickle.
Chamomile's another one.
Yes. So, peas is another thing to be planting in April, and I'm talking about all varieties. They like to climb, so give them something to climb on. A lot of people will go ahead, and this time of year in April, they will go ahead and start their sunflowers and plant peas next to it. The Mammoth brand of sunflower is the sunflower that humans can dry and eat the seeds. There are other types of sunflowers that help bring in the pollinators, like your vanilla ice and your Mexican sunflower. Of course, that one it's just beautiful. It's like a butterfly magnet. They have chocolate, and I believe I have some packets here.
She's going to vanish for a second, guys. We only have one camera right now, so that's and trying to balance it. I think that's why the camera is fading out some of us sometimes, because we're also using green screen behind us.
I didn't bring all of them with me, but just to show you some. Your chocolate, just your regular sunflower. And this is the Henry Wild. Whereas you can tell this is more of a binding type, like your vanilla ice does, where it's going to spread out and make a whole lot of little flowers. And I also have some other stuff to show you as we get on in the discussion to some of the other things that you can plant in April. Unless you think of some other veggies that we haven't mentioned.
Well, I think you covered a lot of them. Peppers is still one that you would want to get started now if you haven't.
Start them indoors in your trays, probably.
I would sow them now in the ground. If you haven't got them started now, unless you can use a heat pad to speed up the process and then get them out there sooner, that'd be the best. So the one thing that we haven't talked about with a lot of these plants, if you start indoors, while she's asked me this, so I know we veered off topic on this a few times, but if you have any plants indoors, you have to harden them off. What the hardening off is is adapting them to the outside environments, but you have to do it very slowly. So we have a lot of tomatoes and peppers indoors. Beautiful plants. We do not want them to get destroyed. We've had fans on them to help strengthen them for normal breeze, not windstorms. So windstorms will wipe them out. So it's something we got to be careful on too. But you have to harden them off to the sun. It would be like you've been indoors, let's just say 6-7 months straight. You've never stepped outside. And then for the first time you step outside, your body's not used to the sun and you will get sunburned very easily. Plants have the same problem. If they have been spoiled to artificial light, even windowsill light, anything that doesn't give them the actual full penetration of the sun, they will burn up. What'll happen is the leaves will turn white, dry up, turn brown, and then the plant will eventually die without the extra leaves. So what you have to do is set a time, and this is where it gets to be kind of a pain. And this is why I think some people get frustrated with it. You have to, originally, the first day you're going to treat them to sun, you have to only have them out there for about 30 minutes to an hour max. And then you have to bring them back to other light. Then you're going to want to increase that at least the first 3 days, about 30 to 45 minutes each day. So you've got about, let's say you're up to about 4 hours by day 5. Now you're going to slowly increase it until around day 7, 8. It's been there about 8-9 hours. And then at some point you can leave them out there for the entire day. They have to get adjusted to the sunlight, otherwise they will burn up. Any new leaves they produce while outside in the sun will be adjusted to the sun and not burn up, but that will stunt your growth. That'll slow down your plant's growth, your production. So it's better to just slowly get them used to that. A lot of times if you buy them in the store or Home Depot or wherever, they've had those out in the sun for a while, and that's why they don't burn up. But if they're any type of indoors, then you have to be a little cautious about it, as any little bit of sun can burn a plant up. Which is part of the reason why I'm thankful Anne's assisting me, because while I'm at work, the best time to get them exposed to sun is basically the crack of dawn. Which you do not want to start them out in the heat of the day or after noon when you first introduce them to the sun. You want that first early sunlight where it's not as powerful. That way they get used to it.
And hopefully not as windy.
Yes. Like today, we could not bring them out because we've had 50-mile-per-hour winds and all sorts of fun stuff. So that's part of the reason why we were on day 1 and we had a good success with it. Nothing burned up. But then now we're going to have to start back over tomorrow. And then on the day it's cold, we'll have to kind of skip that day and hope for the best, because we're at the point of no return for our tomatoes and peppers. We have to get them. Like I told her, I said, I have to get these in the ground probably by no later than next weekend, because they still need time to adjust. They still need time to adapt to their ground that they're moving to. And there will be a brief delay on growth, and you're going to want them to focus on root growth versus plant growth. That way they get more established in that soil. So there is always a delay when you transplant.
I did think of a couple more vegetables that you might want to go ahead and start in the ground in April, and that would be your spinach and your Swiss chard. Those also do well in the cooler temperatures, and your spinach will go quite a long time.
And if you get the
There's
Malabar spinach, we had that all summer long. It's that one's a pole type spinach. There is ground spinach, and then there's also pole spinach, which they all do have their own unique flavor.
Yes, they do. And then there's the Bajoli's and the Olympic, and then what's the one that you planted?
Bloomsdale.
Bloomsdale.
Yeah, that's the one I like quite a bit for just stir fries and things like that.
And then on your onion plants, most of the time, if you're starting them this time of year, you usually don't want to start them with seeds. It's better to go with the sets, and get the bulbs started, and then get the reds, the whites, the yellows. They should all be available this time of year. Same way with your potatoes. There's many different varieties that you can get. And if you haven't already started making slips for sweet potatoes, it would be a good time to start doing that.
You might be a little late at this point, though.
Because it's going to be 180 days once you start getting ready to plant.
Usually you want to get your slips ready in February or no later than March. Now, the ones that we bought that were the whole seeds, we have not had luck with them. I've had better luck buying the ones that are from the store, which kind of surprised me. I don't know what the deal was with that, but
just make sure you're starting with a good foundation, because, the return of life is continuing in your garden, and it needs you to help it along. And so when you are planting all these different vegetables, a lot of people like to do the cottage style gardening now, which is where they're planting their flowers and vegetables in the same area to help the pollinators find the plants a little bit easier. So like your beans, the pole beans, I'll show you a couple different types that I have that I'm going to try this year. I did plant some of these last year. The Royal Burgundy, I planted those last year. They were very, very good. So we're going to plant those again. I did also some yard-long beans. I had never planted them before, though, so I wasn't really sure when they were mature enough. So they did grow anywhere from 2 to 3 foot long.
My favorite was the Chinese long bean. Those were really, really good. I didn't find the seeds for those this year. I remember we had to buy the plant.
Yes, and these are the Scarlet Runner pole beans, and those are very good. And then Blue Lake is another one that people really like, and the Kentucky Wonder. And I think there was another brand.
Blue Lake 374 is a bush bean, which is a pretty common one that a lot of people use. By the way, I think I did off topic. I did figure out why sometimes you're fading in and out. When you hold the green packages, it is a green screen. I just thought about that.
That could make a big difference.
Yep.
And then your peas, any of the vining plants, it's easy to just take those bamboo poles, or what are they called? Those green poles that we have.
They're like some type of aluminum or fiberglass.
Yeah, fiberglass.
Like yeah,
rods, and just put 3 of them together and form out a little teepee. They'll wrap around them. The spinach, the Malabar spinach, it wraps around that pole. I even planted some Malabar spinach in a stacking planter, and it worked fine. I just had to put a pole in the pocket, and it went right up the pole.
Trellises are really good too. If you can make a trellis, or even get some of the more cheap ones, those work great too.
So, and then on your onion sets, check to see what the maturity time is, because there's the short day, the intermediate, and the long day. And you want to know which types you are growing. And a lot of times, you don't want to run out of time with something that you are planting, especially if you're going to switch beds and need that space for something else that you're planting.
A lot of times what people do, especially depending on your timing, they'll go and they may have broccoli and lettuce and stuff in that bed. And then they, after it's used up, it's, the plant's life, they may switch it to green beans to put more nitrogen back in the ground, since green beans are notorious for that, which green beans is probably one of the very few plants that's darn near a companion plant for almost anything. There's a handful that they're not, but most plants actually like the green beans in there just because they support each other.
Yeah.
But you have to double check your listing. There's so many different lists that I don't feel like any gardener is going to remember them offhand without just having a list wrote out, or look up in like your college agriculture websites and stuff like that. A lot of times those places will have a good list of your companion plants. I mean, you can even Google that. The big reason why I say that is I don't even remember half the stuff sometimes when it comes to companion plants. I just know that they're important, so I may have to look up because I don't remember, can onions go with this? Onions is one that surprisingly is not a really good companion plant for a lot of plants, because the risk of the pungent smell kind of going to the plants that you're going to eat, like your lettuces and stuff. There's some different ones that are that you have to be careful on.
And it pairs well with tomatoes, but it's another thing. Like he said, you want to double check your companion planting. And there's Farmer's Almanac has a real good chart, and I think it's highly recommended and probably used a lot. There's a lot of books out on companion planting. Like I said, there's a lot of free charts that you can get. So then I think even Amazon sells the little charts that you can refer to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of nice to have that on hand, so you know that you're not putting the wrong thing in the wrong bed and then wonder why something's got a stunted growth. Yeah. So I'm going to refocus on some of the things that starting out, that make sure you have rich, well draining soil, amend it with a good compost. Your cow manure is usually the best, but you can use anything else that's available. Follow the seed packet depth, ensure the sunlight for all of your choices that you're planting, whether it's flowers or vegetables or whatever the case is. Sow your seeds after the last expected frost date in your area, or make sure that you have something that you can cover your seedlings with if there's a danger of a freeze or frost coming. Keep the soil watered consistently after you plant to help with the germination process and growth. You need to keep an eye on the weather with the updates, especially when you're going through a drought season. And all of those kind of tips are going to help you be more successful in with what you're planting. I'm going to give you some flower seed choices of things that you can still direct sow. And in April, a lot of times people will winter sow, like the wild seed mixes and things like that, or they have little boxes of shaded area mix or sun mix or hummingbird mix. And these are specially packaged up already with different types of flowers. And you just sow the seeds as you go. They also have native mixes now, because they're trying to get more people to plant more native plants and more of the grasses and things to help the birds and the butterflies and bring back the pollinators and help with the monarch, saving the monarch and saving the bees. And you want to help support that as much as you can, because the less that you can use any kind of pesticide and you do more natural stuff, the better it is for the environment, the better it is for the food that you're eating, the better it's going to be for your overall health, and all the way around it's going to be better. But if you want to have a beautiful summer with lots of color, here's going to be some flower seed choices that I'm going to recommend, and I will show you packages of some of these. So that way, if you don't know what they look like, you'll have some idea. I have all kinds. I don't stick to one brand or variety. So I'm not affiliating or, giving some other company credit for something that they have.
And I'll say that too. No matter what, you can go with Berry Morse, you can go with Burpee, you can go with Hidden Valley. I mean, there's so many different seed companies. There really isn't a preference. I mean, the only thing that you're going to deal with with companies is their hybrids that they own the rights to, that they know the recipe on how to get that certain seed, such as Burpee has the rights to the yellow pears, I believe that's the one, or the orange ones, one of them, because they said it's a Burpee. It was said something like Burpee exclusive for 2024, 2025. They found the right combination. Maybe they used the 1000 tomato and they cross-pollinated it with, a mortgage lifter or something. It's hard to say how they got to that, but they do own the rights to that. So that's the only time you're going to see where buying seeds matter, is if it's an exclusive.
So Black-Eyed Susan is a real popular flower that you can plant this time of year.
And they're big seeds too.
Yes.
I can feel them.
This one is Amaranth. It's a very pretty flower.
Amaranth is really cool. I really do like this one. We did it last year.
And of course, these are your petite French marigolds, and I plant a lot of those around in the garden area and around the patio area, and it does help get rid of some of the mosquitoes and stuff. And
ladybugs do tend to like these. I've had some people tell me that I know here locally, oh my god, ladybugs, you gotta get rid of them, they're parasite. No, ladybugs eat a lot of the bugs on your plants that are parasites, such as your aphids, or spider mites. Ladybugs will eat that. Spider mites is something that a lot of people are going to deal with this year because of the drought and the heat, and they love those two conditions. So you're going to have, try to bring in more of your predatory bugs that love to feast on those type of things without using chemical.
And I always say, unless I'm wrong, but this one actually helps bring in ladybugs to the garden. This is Astillibibe, I think. I'm probably saying it wrong. It's a shade-loving bottle brush shape.
Astillibibe Arindaceae bunter.
But the blooms are like pink, purple, and white. But it's a very, very pretty flower. Bachelor button, they have a tendency to reseed themselves from year to year. I did plant some of these a few years back in one garden area, And last year it was covered in bachelor buttons. I had
So-
little blue flowers everywhere.
This one would be considered similar to like your oregano and your mints and stuff. If you don't contain it, it will spread rapidly. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but you may have them in areas you do not want. So you got to keep an eye on these.
Yeah, they're blue. Most of the time blue. There's some pinks and stuff, but they tend to get pretty tall, and so they can block out some of your shorter plants. And I believe I showed him the black-eyed Susan.
You did.
Calendula, you will see those a lot in some of your flower arrangements and stuff, and they seem to grow better in some of the other zones, but I've had some pretty good luck still for this area. I know 100 miles away from here, I did not do as well with calendula. Columbine is a really good flower. The bees, the butterflies, the birds, they all love it, but it does like shade. It does not like to be in direct sun. And here's another cornflower.
I was going to bring up too, while she's talking about that, pennies is a nice perennial to have that you can plant around this time. Rose bushes, those are another one. So if you can find the plant Rosa Sharon is really nice too, but those things get massive.
And that's actually a bush. So, and I didn't actually get into the bushes for April. Most of the time, you're going to do your bushes more towards the middle of May. There are different varieties of cosmos, and we'll show you some of the different varieties of seeds for cosmos. I love cosmos. They bring the butterflies will swarm over these, so that's why I have so many different kinds here. But and my husband likes cosmos, so we plant a lot of those. Your daisies are another thing. Sorry, I had an itch there. Daisies are another real popular plant. They use those a lot of times in the cut flower bouquets and stuff too. But the chrysanthemum, parthenium type are strongly recommended to help bring in pollinators. This one is known as feverfew. It's just another fancy name for a daisy. And then your Shasta daisy, of course.
From Alaska.
Foxglove is a great plant if you're trying to get those hummingbirds in. It is a tall plant that is kind of hard to keep alive, kind of like larkspur. It's just
and it's a biennial, but a lot of times they
some support.
They are biennial, and a lot of times they don't make it that second year, depending on where you're at.
And here's what larkspur looks like. And once again, here's some different types of marigolds. I know one year we planted a marigold that was a giant type marigold.
It was just a basic marigold, but the soil was so fertile. We had
they were
4 foot tall.
Yeah, some of them were 4 to 6 foot tall.
Yeah,
and big, bushy, and they did have a lot of insects on them. Morning glories come in a lot of different colors, and they're another great one if you're trying to get hummingbirds and butterflies and stuff into your yard. The seeds are very hard on those sometimes. What I like to do is soak them for 24 hours before sowing them.
and there's a lot of plants you can
And
soak the seeds a little bit.
4 o'clocks are about the same way. They're similar. They're not the same family, but they are a lot similar. And of course, your poppies. Those are another thing that are really popular to sow in April.
And she'll be busy planting a lot of these very soon.
Yes. Snapdragons, there are different types of those. They are another pollinator magnet. And of course, the bumblebees really like them too. But there's a type that grows like a vine. It's a climbing type. And then there's also the one that most people are familiar with that come in the pastel colors. And he mentioned the violas and the violets, Johnny Jump Ups. Your zinnias, the yellow ones make a great trap crop to plant around squash. I'm not sure why.
It's the coloring because
the yellow
is similar to the flower. So the vine borers will go after it. Just like they've said that you can use yellow bowls with like water and dish soap, and you might be able to trick the vine borers to fly into that. But I have never had much luck with that.
Here's some more phlox for people that don't know. And those are, they look really good in your hanging baskets or your ground creeping, your low plants. If you're trying to do something where you're using a backdrop and making a canvas, like you're doing a cottage type garden layout, that'll be something that you're going to plant on the front row or along the borders and the edges and stuff.
Or you just say, what the phlox?
Nasturtiums, those are definitely...
Nasturtiums.
They are a definite must.
No, maybe it is nasturtium.
I say nasturtium. I might be saying it wrong. Maybe
it's nasturtium. Now you got me questioning. I've been calling it nasturtium. Anyway, these are a great trap as well for a lot of bugs, to keep them away from your vegetables. A lot of times your caterpillars and stuff will go after these instead of your crops.
And this is another one to help bring in pollinators. Your bees absolutely love wild bergamot. And here's another one that most people are probably not. They are a very small, delicate flower, the cardinal climber. It'll be very, very dainty, but it's another hummingbird delight. And of course, then there's other ones that you'll sow later on, like your baby's breath, your asters, your coleus. You'll see those probably more in May. But most of the seeds that I've showed you are things that you want to go ahead and be planting now that April is here and get into spring and having it rock for you.
Yep. So,
and then I'll mention a few bulb plants. If you haven't already planted, a lot of times your bulb plants that they have out in the spring that you have to get in the ground, they say March and April, need to get those in pretty quick. And that's going to be your clematis and your daylilies, your other types of lilies. They have the calla lily, the tiger lily, the Asian lily. Those all need to get planted soon. And other flowers that you might want to plant, now's the time to go ahead and start sowing them, even indoors in small trays. And then, of course, the other one that I forgot to mention was and I say it wrong, is the echinacea or coneflower. It's another one that you want to get started in April next to your dahlias.
And if you happen to have any questions after the stream, we're always happy to answer from what we know from our experience that we've dealt with a lot of some of this stuff. And, we're always learning new things too. I mean, there's always some new cool techniques and stuff that we can learn. That's the thing with gardening. It's a never ending learning process, and we continue to learn new things every day.
And as they come out every year with new products to make gardening easier and to help save your crops and stuff, it does make it more successful. And like I said, just take the time to read up and know more about your companion plants. I can tell you I do better when I'm actually out on where the garden beds are and I know what I planted where. It's kind of like, okay, this goes with this, and it's just habit. And then when I got to talk about it, I got to stop and think, okay, what did I plant with that?
Well, sometimes it's habit versus jumping in your cognitive thoughts and being like, oh, hey, you do that. Because even like for me, the first thing I mentioned to you is, hey, I need you to harden these off while I'm at work, but I can only do it 30 minutes. I just have to do it between work, lunch breaks and stuff. And it was just off the cuff because I remember we were talking about the times, and then I had almost all the times exactly right, because a lot of people had the misconception that, oh, you just put them out there for 3 or 4 hours at the start, and a lot of times you end up burn up everything. So it's just, I just know that the magic number is 10 days of 10 days of slowly hardening them to the sun. So it's one of those things that just kind of just ingrained in me that sometimes I just forget, to explain it fully why, because it's like, I have had plants that we brought out and, they made it, but they were so slow. Our aromas last year actually was one that started slow because we had too many of them, had nowhere to put them. And then so we last minute, and they turned out to be some of our best tomato plants too, which is kind of funny, but they end up mass producing at the end of the year instead of throughout the,
they got a late
summer.
start, but I remember when I planted them outdoors, the seedlings were only about 2 inches high, and I was kind of fearful of that, but they did really well for me, and I did cover them up. And like I said, the little tiny wire trash cans that you can get like at the Dollar Tree stores and stuff were wonderful for small seedlings because you could put them pretty much close to each other and they weren't going to interfere with other plants. So you're doing the seedlings.
One of my science projects I want to do, and I don't know if I'll have time this year, but I want to take some seeds and just a test pool. And then I want to take shade cloth, but I want to take it at 70%, then 50%, and then 30%. And I want to leave them outside, but I want to have them covered with that shade cloth, not directly on them, but enough that it's over them. And I want to test that and let you guys know. I don't think I'll have time this year just because it's already April, but that's something I told Mom that I said, I would like to test this theory out, because if you have bulk plants like we do, that's a lot of bringing inside, outside. And I'm wondering, I want to take it a step further and see, okay, is there a way we can shield them outside to get the adequate sun all day long, as long as it's not windy? If it's windy, you probably want to bring them in. I mean, we're not talking like 5 or 10 miles an hour. We're talking like we've been getting gusts where just tonight, one of my trees got ripped off, or the branch got ripped off the tree. And so I've got a probably 400-pound, 20-foot tree branch up vertically against the tree now. And I'm just like, oh, lovely. So, I mean, you don't want that type of wind because that'll just shred your seedlings. So, I mean, I do want to experiment with this though. And that's something hopefully, and maybe I'll have time this summer to do it because there is some summer crops that are come up that I may start indoors. If I do that, then I'm going to try to get some shade cloth to do that experiment. But I feel like it may be better to do that in the spring because a lot of times we just sow directly in the summer. So that's another project that I was going to bring up because I'd like to test this out further.
But we'll be doing a lot more. We'll be doing a little more planting styles and more with the vertical gardening because of trying to grow more in small spaces. We're going to try and do some tomatoes growing up an arch this year, an arch trellis, and more beans and peas, of course, growing up the trellis. But different ways of making trellises on your own, and also show you some of the benches and stuff that I've made using concrete blocks and wood and stuff for the family, because sometimes when you have a pretty good sized family, or you know, a lot of wind and stuff, you need something that the wind's not going to blow over and destroy all the time. Sometimes it's just better to just build something out of concrete and lumber. And so I want to show you some of the things that you can do, and you can make it nice.
Which is funny because most of the stuff you buy like Home Depot, Lowe's, Menards, all those places, hardware stores, Sam's Club, a lot of that lawn stuff I've seen, since it's rather cheaply made, it's not equipped to deal with.
Well, they give
windy
you
areas.
A weight limit that they recommend, but when the winds hit the way they do sometimes and they get picked up and heave-hoed.
I remember the gazebo. We got one of those just for our first year here. We got a gazebo. Within a week, we had 30-mile-per-hour winds, ripped it apart. And then we had to sit there and try to rebuild it. It's, that's where our point. I just looked at her and says, it probably would have been better if we just built it ourselves. And that's kind of one things that we're looking at too, because a lot of the stuff you buy in those stores is not equipped to deal with the wind. And a lot of your Midwest states deal with a lot of wind.
And you would make sure that you are setting out little type of watering dishes. They don't have to be very deep, but make sure that you are providing some type of water for your pollinators. It's another thing that people forget about, but they're going flower to flower to do some work for you, but we need to at least supply them with some water. So I like to get the real small rocks that they can land on and be able to get a drink of water and stuff. So it's a good idea to put different things like that out. And if you'll notice, right behind me is a little yellow bug house. I have several of those sitting around in the garden and stuff too. And like I said, last year we had a couple praying mantises. I don't know whether any of them will be returning this year or not. It'll be interesting to find out.
I'm curious too, because we did run into a male. We did run into a female, and Mom had found the female and gave her a place to lay her eggs. Of course, you never know where they're going to lay their eggs. So as far as we know, she could have had a clutch, which is, I think, anywhere like 3 or 4 eggs or something like that. And that, if I remember right, it's 3 or 4 eggs. I think it has about 100 mantis in it. But the problem is, as soon as they hatch, they're all fighting each other. It's like Armageddon. Who survives the war, because they're gonna all try to eat each other right off the bat. So that's why you don't see a lot of mantises in a thick population, because they're territorial and they will stay away from each other because they're major predators. when it comes to your garden, which is what you want. I mean, I think praying mantis, ladybugs, those are some of your best bugs. And if you, and depending if you have a phobia or not, garden spiders, I would not introduce spiders. They'll come on their own accord. But we've seen some garden spiders that, you know, they catch a bunch of mosquitoes and aphids, and we just leave them alone and they don't bother us. It's like, okay, they're just doing their job.
They're kind of pretty to look at.
Yeah, especially ones that have like 4 or 5 different colors on them. You know, it's like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, the big garden spiders.
But it just depends, because I know a lot of spiders is one of the biggest phobias out there. So it's not something that I recommend.
And of course, you guys know that I do like wind chimes, and I've decorated the pear tree with them. And I'll have to make some new ones because the winds have destroyed the ones that we had on the front porch. And
this year we've had the worst winds this year. I swear.
One of our rain barrels was rolling down the driveway the other day, so it is now propped with planters up against it and stuff too. So hoping it rains and can get that filled up and help stabilize it. And I've wired the other ones down, so getting ready for everything, and just want everything to be successful. I want you guys to have great success. I hope that you are learning something from us, and if there's things that you want to know about, I'm constantly researching stuff. So anything that you want to know, don't be afraid to ask us. You know, if I don't know the answer from my family history and the way I was taught as a kid.
She likes to read books and stuff. And
I know people always, you know, say, they'll come up to me and say, I've been a master gardener for years. And I just look at them like, that's great. I was a farmer for years. I'm like,
master gardener know what's the title, but
it's like
you're always learning something new. I don't care.
You never stop learning.
Yeah. I mean,
so I don't knock it. I may end up deciding, okay, I want to learn to do this next too. You know, the more I can learn, the happier I am, because it's like, it's gardening. I want to know.
That's the spirit of it, is you just want to grow. You want to see those plants succeed, and you want to have a good harvest. That is your ultimate goal. So, I mean, yeah, just remember that your gardener will always learn something new every day. And it doesn't matter how experienced you are. We are always learning new stuff. I mean, that's the cool part about it.
And I have a new tomato I'm going to try this year. Also, it's going to be hanging from a hanging pot. I think it's Tiny Tim or something like that. But I'm excited to try that. It's one of the new ones that I bought for this year. So it's going to be interesting and exciting to try new things. So when we have these little sessions where we go live, we want you guys to interact, and, you know, hopefully we can keep your attention and that you find it educational, and that you'll get something out of it.
And the thing is, what I've said with my other channel that I do a lot of live streams on, if you're just content with watching, you know, you don't have to say anything, you know, you just never feel pressured. But we're always happy to answer questions when it comes to gardening. That's one of the things, you know, we try to find the answer, and that's something we enjoy. It's interesting how gardening was the one thing that really got me and my mother really close and bonding, because she doesn't share a lot of the same hobbies I do. So I think gardening is one of those things that is something that a lot of people can connect with, because that's
mom did it, grandma did it, great grandma did it. I mean, it just the grandparents, you know, the men were just as just as much as involved, I think, as the women were. Seemed like the women concentrating more on growing the fruits and vegetables and stuff, where the men concentrating more on the farming aspect of it with the cattle and all the animals and different things to put the meat on the table and stuff. But you learned from, watching and participating and getting children involved. They love going out to the garden and picking vegetables and helping out with that. I mean, it's exciting for them. Or if you let them snack on something. My dogs love snacking on fresh carrots. They like it when we're out in the garden and I can pull one up and I'm like, oh, look what we got. And so.
Yep. But I think we're going to wrap this show up here, guys, because we do want to try to keep this show probably about an hour, hour and a half at most, because I figure that's pretty good enough for at least getting some information out. But, we'll have some new videos dropping this week. So stay tuned on that. And last things you want to say?
Don't be melancholy. You're in the garden.
She wants to remain happy.
Let us remain happy. That's right. And successful. We love you guys.
And just remember, Kai Dragon Gardening is like fire. Dragon's fire.
Yes.
Because she came up with that. She comes up with the corny lines. I don't.
I think that's the writer in me, maybe. Yep. I don't know.
All right. You guys have a good night.
Peace.